The rifle trembled in Alma Boone's hands as she stepped from behind the boulder. The cowboy below sat easy in his wagon seat, reins loose in weathered fingers. 3 days she had followed this particular wagon through the mountain passes. 3 days of watching and waiting for the right moment. Step away from that wagon. Her voice carried across the narrow pass like wind through canyon walls. The cowboy turned slow, no sudden movements. His eyes found hers and held steady. Something in his gaze made her grip tighten on the rifle stock. The man raised his hands without hurry. A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Well now, miss, was just thinking this journey had gotten too quiet." Alma blinked hard. Robbers got shouting. They got fear or anger or desperate bargaining. They did not get pleasant conversation. "I said step away." He climbed down with the same unhurried grace. Dust rose from his boots as they hit ground. "Take whatever you need." The words hung in the thin mountain air. Alma had practiced this moment in her mind 100 times. The victim would resist. She would have to be firm but not cruel. She would take only what was necessary and disappear into the rocks before he could raise alarm. This man stepped aside like he was inviting her for Sunday dinner. Alma circled wide, keeping the rifle trained on his chest. He watched her move with what looked almost like approval. The wagon bed held supplies wrapped in canvas, sacks of grain, personal belongings tied down with rope. Her hands shook as she pulled back the coverings. No strongbox, no bags of gold coins, no government payroll. Her heart dropped toward her boots. She grabbed a small leather pouch from beneath the wagon seat. The coins inside clinked together with a sound thin as autumn leaves. Maybe $20, maybe less. This cannot be right. The words slipped out before she could stop them. The cowboy tilted his head like he was studying something interesting. "Something particular you were hoping to find." Alma stepped back, clutching the pathetic coin pouch. 2 weeks. Ezra had 2 weeks before they would put the rope around his neck for theft he never committed. 2 weeks to find the money that would buy his freedom from men who dealt in corruption, the way others dealt in cattle and grain. She had been so certain this wagon carried the gold shipment, so certain this was her answer. "You forgot my heart, miss." The cowboy's voice was gentle as creek water over stones. Alma stared at him. Heat climbed her neck despite the mountain chill. Something in his tone made her chest tight. She backed toward the rocks where her horse waited. The rifle stayed pointed in his direction, but her hands had stopped shaking. Now they felt numb. "I do not understand you. Most folks forget the important things when they are hurrying." Alma reached her horse and swung into the saddle without lowering the weapon. The animal danced sideways, sensing her confusion. Below in the pass, the cowboy made no move toward any hidden gun. He stood with his hands still raised, watching her with those steady eyes. "Who are you?" "Name is Silas McGraw, and you are someone with troubles bigger than what is in my wagon." The truth of it hit her square in the chest. Alma wheeled her horse around and kicked hard toward the high country. Behind her, Silas McGraw called out once more, "I will be taking the northern trail if you change your mind about that heart." She rode hard until her horse was blowing foam. Only then did she slow and look back. The pass was empty except for wind and settling dust. McGraw had continued on his way like nothing had happened. Like he had not just been robbed by a desperate woman with trembling hands and poor aim. Alma guided her horse toward the hidden canyon where she had made temporary camp. The coin pouch bounced against her leg with each step. $20 would not buy Ezra's freedom, would not even buy her a decent meal in most towns. She had robbed the wrong wagon. The sun dropped toward the western peaks, painting the sky the color of old blood. Somewhere in these mountains, the real gold shipment moved under guard toward its destination. Somewhere, corrupt men counted money stolen from honest folk, while her brother sat in a cell counting days until execution. Alma dismounted at her camp and unsaddled her horse with mechanical precision. Her hands moved through familiar motions while her mind raced in circles. McGraw's words echoed in her memory, his strange calm, the way he had looked at her like he understood something she had not yet spoken aloud. Most troubling of all was the way he had let her take what little he had without question or complaint, as if $20 meant nothing to him, as if helping a stranger meant everything. Alma had not trusted kindness in 2 years, not since the last well-meaning person had promised to help her family and then disappeared when real danger showed itself. Kindness was a luxury poor folk could not afford. Trust was a mistake that got you killed or worse. But something about Sela's, McGraw felt different. Something about the way he had said her troubles were bigger than his wagon. Like he knew exactly what kind of troubles a woman might have that would drive her to robbery in broad daylight. She built a small fire as darkness settled over the mountains. The flames danced against canyon walls while she counted McGraw's coins over and over. $23.50, enough to buy supplies for a few more days. Not enough to save the only family she had left. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Storm clouds gathered over the high peaks like dark promises. Alma pulled her coat tight and stared into the fire. Tomorrow she would have to start over. Find the real gold shipment. Take bigger risks with more dangerous men. Tomorrow she would have to become someone even more desperate than the woman who had pointed a rifle at Sela's McGraw's chest. The wind picked up, scattering sparks into the darkness. Somewhere out there, McGraw was making his own camp. Somewhere out there, he was probably thinking about the strange woman who had tried to rob him and failed so completely. Alma closed her eyes and tried not to think about Hearts at all. Dawn brought no answers. Alma broke camp with the efficiency of someone who had learned to travel light and leave no trace. Her horse moved stiff beneath the saddle. The animal favored its left foreleg with each step down the rocky trail. She had spent the night planning. 3 more wagons were scheduled to pass through the territory in the next week. One of them had to be carrying the gold shipment that would buy Ezra's freedom. One of them had to hold her answer. The storm that had threatened the night before gathered strength over the peaks. Black clouds rolled across the sky heavy with rain and wind. Alma pulled her hat low and urged her horse toward the main trail. The first fat raindrops hit when she was still 2 hours from the trading post. Within minutes, the drops became sheets of water that turned dust to mud and rocks to death traps. Her horse stumbled twice on the descent into Miller's Canyon. The third stumble sent them both sliding sideways toward a drop that would kill them. Alma threw her weight hard to the right and felt her horse recover its footing. They came to rest against a boulder the size of a cabin. She dismounted and ran her hands down the animal's legs. The left foreleg was hot and swollen, lame enough that riding further would cripple the horse permanently. Walking would mean exposure to the storm and missing any chance of intercepting the next wagon. Thunder cracked overhead close enough to feel in her bones. Lightning turned the canyon walls white for split seconds before plunging everything back into gray darkness. Alma looked around for shelter and found a narrow opening in the rock face 20 yards away. The cave was deeper than it appeared from outside. Dry sand covered the floor and old ashes marked where others had sheltered here before. Alma led her horse inside and unsaddled quickly. The animal stood with its head hanging low. She had grain for 3 days, water for 2 if she was careful. After that, she would have to choose between her own survival and her brother's life. Alma built a small fire near the cave mouth where the smoke would draw away. The flames pushed back the darkness and reflected off wet stone walls. Outside, the storm raged with the fury of something alive and angry. She was checking the supplies in her saddlebags when she heard the horse whimper softly. Another horse answered from somewhere beyond the cave entrance. Alma grabbed her rifle and moved to the shadows beside the opening. A figure emerged from the storm leading a pack animal. Water ran from his hat brim and his coat hung heavy with rain. He paused at the cave mouth and called out, "Hello, the fire. Mind if I share the shelter?" Sela's McGraw's voice was unmistakable. Alma pressed herself deeper into the shadows and said nothing. The man who had let her rob him was the last person she wanted to face again. McGraw waited a full minute before speaking again. "Storm's getting worse. My horse needs rest, and I suspect yours does too." He knew she was there. Something in his tone made it clear he was not asking permission so much as announcing his intention to enter. Alma stepped into the firelight with her rifle ready. "This shelter is taken." McGraw studied her across the dancing flames. Water dripped from his clothes onto the sand floor. His own horse stood patient in the rain behind him. Big enough for two, maybe even three if we count the animals. He moved past her into the cave without waiting for agreement. His horse followed willingly. Alma kept the rifle trained on his back as he unsaddled and rubbed down his mount with practiced motions. "Why are you here?" "Same reason as you. Storm caught me in the open." McGraw built up the fire with wood from his own supplies. The added heat felt good against Alma's damp clothes. She lowered the rifle but did not set it aside. "You followed me. I took the northern trail. You took the canyon route. Storm brought us to the same shelter." He spoke without looking at her. His hands moved over his gear with the efficiency of someone accustomed to making camp in difficult places. Everything about his manner suggested this meeting was pure coincidence. Alma did not believe in coincidence. "What do you want?" McGraw finally met her eyes across the fire. The flames painted shadows on his weathered face and turned his eyes dark as canyon stone. "To get dry, to rest my horse, to wait out whether that will kill us both if we try to ride through it." Truth lived in his voice. Alma had learned to recognize lies during 2 years of dealing with desperate people in desperate circumstances. McGraw was not lying about the storm or his immediate needs, but he was not telling her everything either. She settled against the cave wall with the rifle across her knees. McGraw made no comment about the weapon. He shared his coffee and some dried meat without being asked. The food was better than anything she had eaten in days. They sat in silence while rain drummed against stone and wind howled through the canyon. The cave felt smaller with both of them inside, but not uncomfortable. McGraw had a way of taking up space without crowding. "Your horse is lame." The words came quiet as the settling fire. Alma looked toward her animal standing with one hoof barely touching ground. "It will heal." "Not if you ride it hard." McGraw rose and moved toward her horse with the slow care of someone who understood nervous animals. Alma tensed but did not stop him. He ran expert hands down the injured leg and made soft sounds that seemed to calm the horse. "Needs a week of rest, maybe 2. "I do not have 2 weeks." The admission slipped out before she could stop it. McGraw returned to his place by the fire and poured more coffee. He did not ask questions about her timeline or what urgency drove her. "There are other ways to travel." "Such as?" "Depends on where you need to go." Alma studied his face in the firelight. The man spoke in riddles and half-truths. He offered help without knowing what kind of help was needed. Most troubling of all, he acted as if her problems were his concern. "Why do you care what happens to me?" McGraw was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. When he spoke, his voice carried weight that had not been there before. "Because I have seen what desperation does to good people. Because someone with your troubles should not have to face them alone. You know nothing about my troubles." "I know enough." The fire popped and sent sparks toward the cave ceiling. Outside, the storm began to ease, but rain still fell steady as tears. McGraw leaned back against the stone wall and closed his eyes. "I know you are not a thief by nature. I know you are afraid, but not of me. I know time is running short for something that matters more than your own life." Each word hit center target. Alma gripped the rifle tighter and fought the urge to demand explanations. How could a stranger read her so clearly after one brief encounter? "I know because I have been where you are now." McGraw opened his eyes and looked directly at her. "Someone you love is in danger. Someone with power wants them dead or gone. You are willing to become everything you hate if it means saving them." The cave went silent except for the whisper of dying flames and distant rain. Alma felt something crack inside her chest. The careful walls she had built around her heart showed their first fissure. "His name is Ezra." The words came out barely louder than breathing. McGraw nodded once as if this confession was expected. "Tell me about Ezra." The words came slow at first. Alma told McGraw about Ezra in pieces, testing each revelation against his reaction. Her younger brother had been a teacher too, had believed in justice and fairness the way some people believed in Sunday sermons. He found discrepancies in the tax records. Money that should have gone to schools and roads ended up in private accounts. McGraw fed the fire with steady hands. His face showed nothing, but the flames reflected in his eyes grew brighter. Ezra took his findings to Sheriff Drummond, thought he was doing his civic duty. A piece of burning wood collapsed into ash. McGraw adjusted the remaining logs with careful precision. 3 days later, they arrested him for stealing from the county treasury, the same money he had tried to report as missing. They framed him. The words carried no surprise. McGraw spoke as if corrupt officials were weather patterns, predictable and dangerous. The trial lasted 2 hours. They had witnesses who swore they saw him taking money from the courthouse safe, had documents with his signature authorizing transfers to accounts in his name. Alma's hands tightened around the rifle stock. Even now, months later, the memory burned. Everything was false, every witness, every document, but the judge was bought and the jury was scared. McGraw rose and moved to the cave entrance. Rain still fell, but gentler now. The worst of the storm had passed over the mountains toward the eastern plains. Drummond offered a deal. They always do. $20,000 and Ezra would escape during transport, disappear forever but alive. McGraw turned back toward the fire. Something had changed in his posture. The casual traveler was gone, replaced by someone harder. You do not have $20,000. I had nothing. They took our property as evidence, froze any accounts that might have helped. Alma stared into the flames and remembered the day she lost everything that made her respectable. The day she stopped being a schoolteacher and became whatever was necessary to save her brother. So you decided to steal it. I decided to take back what was already stolen. McGraw returned to his place across the fire. He poured the last of the coffee and handed her the cup. The metal was warm against her cold fingers. The gold shipment you were looking for in my wagon. Sheriff Drummond moves money through these mountains twice a month. Bribes and payoffs disguised as supply runs. You have been tracking the wrong shipments. Alma looked up sharply. McGraw met her gaze without flinching. What do you mean? The real money does not travel in obvious wagons with visible guards. It moves quiet, hidden among legitimate cargo. The coffee turned bitter in her mouth. 2 months of watching and following and risking everything for the wrong targets. How do you know this? McGraw was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old secrets. Because I have been watching Drummond longer than you have. The fire crackled between them. Outside, the rain had stopped completely, but water still dripped from the cave entrance where runoff found its way down the rock face. Why? Because good people keep getting hurt. Because corruption spreads unless someone stops it. McGraw reached into his pack and pulled out a folded paper. He handed it across the fire without explanation. Alma unfolded it carefully. The document showed a list of names and amounts, families who had lost property, people who had been falsely accused, money stolen from schools and churches and community funds. Ezra's name appeared halfway down the list. Where did you get this? From someone who keeps track of Drummond's victims. Alma studied the paper more carefully. Some names had notations beside them: helped, relocated, safe. A few were marked with simple crosses. You are part of something. I am part of what needs to happen when official justice fails. McGraw took the paper back and folded it with practiced motions. The document disappeared into his pack among other items Alma had not noticed before. The real gold shipment moves tomorrow night. $50,000 in stolen taxes heading to a bank in Denver where it will disappear into private accounts. Alma's pulse quickened. 50,000 would buy Ezra's freedom twice over. How do you know when and where? Because I have been planning to take it. The admission hung between them heavy as smoke. McGraw watched her face for reaction. Alma felt the world shift beneath her understanding. You are a thief. I am someone who returns stolen property to its rightful owners. That is not how the law sees it. McGraw smiled without humor. The expression changed his entire face. The law put your brother in prison for trying to do the right thing. The law takes money from poor families and gives it to rich men. The law is what we make it when the official version fails. Alma set down the coffee cup. Her hands had started shaking again, but not from cold or fear. You want me to help you rob a gold shipment. I want to help you save your brother. Same thing. Not the same thing at all. McGraw leaned forward. The firelight carved sharp shadows across his weathered features. I take that gold alone. It goes to a dozen families who need it to rebuild their lives. I take it with your help. Your brother lives, and the rest still helps people who deserve justice. What makes you think I would be any help? Because you have been tracking shipments for 2 months without getting caught. Because you have courage enough to point a rifle at a stranger when everything depends on it. Because you understand what it costs to do the right thing. The cave felt smaller suddenly. Alma could hear her own heartbeat in the silence between McGraw's words. I tried trusting people before, when they first arrested Ezra, when I still believed someone would help us because it was right. What happened? They disappeared when it became dangerous. Left us to face Drummond alone. McGraw nodded as if he had expected this answer. I will not disappear. How can I know that? Because I have been fighting Drummond for 3 years. Because I have lost people too. Because running away is not something I do anymore. Alma looked toward her lame horse standing patient in the darkness. 2 weeks until Ezra's execution. No other options left except trusting a man who claimed to steal from thieves. What would you need me to do? McGraw's eyes caught the firelight and held it. Something passed between them that felt larger than planning a robbery. Something that acknowledged the weight of what they were considering. I need someone who knows the mountain trails. Someone who can handle a rifle when things go wrong. Someone who understands the cost of failure. And if we succeed, your brother goes free. The rest of the money helps rebuild what Drummond destroyed. Alma closed her eyes and felt the last of her careful walls crumble. Trust was a luxury she could not afford, but hope was something she could not live without. Tell me about this shipment. They spent the next morning mapping routes on the cave floor with pieces of charcoal. McGraw drew the mountain passes from memory while Alma corrected details from her months of observation. The shipment would travel the old mining road through Devil's Gap, where the canyon walls rose steep enough to block escape routes. 3 guards minimum, maybe 4 if they suspect trouble. McGraw marked positions with small stones. His hands moved with the precision of someone who had planned such operations before. The wagon will be reinforced. Iron plates under the wood. Horses trained not to spook at gunfire. Alma studied the makeshift map. Something felt wrong about the timing, but she could not identify what bothered her. How do you know so much about their security? I have been watching Drummond's operations for 3 years. The answer came too quick, too smooth. Alma looked up from the charcoal lines to find McGraw watching her with careful eyes. That is not a complete answer. McGraw rose and moved to the cave entrance. Morning light turned the wet rocks silver and cast long shadows across the canyon floor. When he spoke, his voice carried new weight. I used to work for men like Drummond, before I understood what they really were. The admission hung between them heavy as storm clouds. Alma felt something shift in her understanding of the man who had let her rob his wagon. You were corrupt. I was young and needed work. They told me I was protecting legitimate business interests. McGraw turned back toward the fire. His face showed nothing, but his hands betrayed tension in the way they gripped his hat brim. How long before you realized the truth? Too long. Long enough for good people to get hurt because of things I did. Alma watched him settle back beside the map. The careful distance he maintained suddenly made sense. A man carrying guilt learned to expect rejection. What changed your mind? A family in Colorado Springs. Father was trying to organize miners for better working conditions. My job was to discourage him. McGraw picked up one of the marker stones and turned it over in his fingers. The small rock caught firelight and threw it back in broken pieces. They had 3 children. The youngest was maybe 6 years old. She brought me water while I was watching their house. The stone went still in his hands. 2 days later, the house burned down. Father died in the fire along with that little girl. Company said it was an accident. But you knew better. I knew because I had reported their daily routines. I knew because my information made it possible. Alma felt her chest tighten. The pain in McGraw's voice was fresh as an open wound despite the years that had passed. So you changed sides. I started paying attention to who got hurt when I did my job. Started asking questions about where the money really went. McGraw set the stone back on the map with deliberate care. Took me another year to work up the courage to walk away. By then, I had a list of people who deserved better than what they got, including my family, including yours. They worked through the afternoon, refining their plan. The gold would transfer from one wagon to another at a relay station 5 miles north of Devil's Gap. McGraw knew the timing because he had helped establish the system years before. The station keeper is named Morrison. He takes a cut of every shipment that passes through. Alma traced possible escape routes with her finger. The terrain offered advantages but also dangers. One wrong turn could trap them in a box canyon. What happens to Morrison after we take the gold? He reports the robbery and collects insurance money. Probably makes more profit than if the shipment had gone through normally. He will describe us to Drummond. McGraw smiled without humor. The expression was becoming familiar. He will describe whoever Drummond wants to hear about. Morrison stays alive by being useful, not truthful. As evening approached, they prepared to leave the cave. Alma's horse moved better after a day of rest but still favored its injured leg. McGraw offered to trade mounts, but she declined. Some partnerships required keeping your own means of escape. They rode single file through the canyon as sunset painted the western sky red as fresh blood. McGraw led the way along trails that showed no recent tracks. He moved through the mountains with the confidence of someone who had traveled these paths many times before. At a fork in the trail, he stopped and waited for her to draw alongside. "There is something else you should know about the gold shipment." Alma felt her stomach drop. Too many surprises made trust impossible. "What?" "The money is not just stolen taxes. Some of it belongs to families who were forced to sell their land below market value. Some comes from businesses that were driven into bankruptcy by false accusations. You are saying the gold represents more than government corruption. I am saying every dollar in that wagon was taken from someone who earned it honestly." McGraw studied her face in the fading light. Something in his expression suggested this revelation was a test. "Does that change anything for you?" Alma considered the question. Taking money from corrupt officials felt like justice. Taking money that belonged to innocent families felt like becoming the same kind of thief who had destroyed her own life. "Where does the money go if we succeed?" "Back to the people it was stolen from. Every family on my list gets enough to rebuild what they lost, including mine, including yours." A hawk circled overhead, riding thermal currents toward its roost. Alma watched the bird disappear among the canyon walls and made her decision. "Then we take it all." They camped that night in a grove of aspen trees whose leaves whispered secrets in the mountain wind. McGraw built a fire small enough to avoid detection, but large enough to keep them warm. They ate dried meat and hardtack while going over final details. "The relay station sits in a clearing surrounded by pine forest. We can get within 50 yards without being seen." McGraw drew the layout in the dirt beside the fire. A simple building with a corral and water trough. No defensive positions except the forest itself. "How many people at the station?" "Morrison and maybe one helper. They will not fight hard for money that is not theirs." Alma checked her rifle for the third time that evening. The weapon was well maintained but old. It would fire straight at close range, but accuracy suffered beyond 100 yards. What if more guards show up than expected? "Then we leave. Your brother's life is not worth dying for if the odds are impossible." The words surprised her. Most men would have insisted on seeing the plan through regardless of danger. McGraw seemed to understand that some battles could not be won. "You would walk away from 3 years of planning. I would wait for a better opportunity. Dead people cannot help anyone." A coyote called from somewhere across the valley. The sound echoed off stone walls before fading into silence. McGraw banked the fire and settled against his saddle. Get some sleep. Tomorrow changes everything. Alma lay on her bedroll staring up at stars bright as scattered coins. Tomorrow she would become a thief by any definition that mattered. Tomorrow she would cross a line that could never be uncrossed. But tomorrow her brother might have a chance to live. They reached the relay station an hour before sunset. The building sat in its clearing exactly as McGraw had described. Log walls weathered gray as old bones. A single window facing the approach road. Smoke rising thin and straight from the stone chimney. Alma positioned herself in the pine trees 40 yards north of the corral. McGraw took the southern approach where the trail curved around a massive boulder. They would have clear lines of sight to each other and overlapping fields of fire if things went wrong. The gold wagon arrived precisely at dusk. 4 guards as McGraw had predicted. They rode with the casual alertness of men who had made this run many times without trouble. The wagon itself looked ordinary except for the iron reinforcement plates McGraw had mentioned. Morrison emerged from the station building as the wagon pulled into the clearing. A thin man with nervous hands and eyes that darted constantly between the guards and the surrounding forest. He helped transfer heavy saddlebags from the wagon to a fresh team of horses while the guards watered their mounts at the trough. Alma counted 6 bags. Each one required 2 men to lift. $50,000 or more if McGraw's information was accurate. Enough money to buy Ezra's freedom and help dozens of other families rebuild their lives. The transfer took 20 minutes. Morrison signed papers and shook hands with the lead guard. The original wagon departed south toward the main road, while the fresh team was hitched to a lighter rig for the mountain crossing to Denver. McGraw stepped from behind his boulder as the new wagon began moving toward the trail. His rifle was ready but not raised. He looked calm as a man asking directions. "Hold there, Morrison." The station keeper dropped the traces he had been adjusting. His face went white as winter sky. The 2 guards accompanying the gold shipment reached for their weapons, but stopped when they saw Alma emerge from the northern tree line. "Easy now. Nobody needs to get hurt." McGraw's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The guards exchanged glances but kept their hands away from their guns. "You know what we want, Morrison. Transfer the bags to our horses and everyone rides away healthy." Morrison nodded rapidly. His nervous energy found outlet in frantic motion as he began moving the gold from wagon to pack animals. The guards stood silent and tense but made no move to interfere. Alma kept her rifle trained on the men while watching the forest for unexpected arrivals. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Too exactly. Her instincts prickled with warnings she could not name. The 4th bag was halfway transferred when a voice called from the trees behind McGraw. "That is far enough, Silas." A man stepped into the clearing with his own rifle ready. Tall and lean, with the weathered look of someone who spent his life outdoors. He moved with confidence that suggested familiarity with violence. Alma swung her weapon toward the newcomer, but McGraw raised his hand to stop her. "Clayton?" "Hello, partner." The word hit Alma harder than a physical blow. Partner. McGraw had mentioned no partner in their planning, had given no indication anyone else would be involved. "This is not what it looks like. It looks like you are robbing a gold shipment with the help of that woman who tried to rob you 3 days ago." Clayton's rifle never wavered from McGraw's chest. His eyes were cold as mountain water and just as clear. "You always were too sentimental, Silas. Gets in the way of good judgment." Alma felt the careful foundation of trust she had built crumbling beneath her feet. McGraw had betrayed her, led her into a trap, used her desperation to serve some purpose she did not understand. The woman does not matter. She was trying to save her brother. The woman pointed a rifle at federal property and threatened a sworn officer. "That makes her matter plenty. Federal property, sworn officer." The words rearranged everything Alma thought she understood about McGraw and his mission. "You are lawmen." Clayton smiled without warmth. His rifle stayed trained on McGraw, but his attention shifted briefly to Alma. United States Marshals. Your friend Silas there has been working undercover for 2 years trying to build a case against Sheriff Drummond. The clearing went silent except for wind through pine branches and the nervous breathing of horses. Alma stared at McGraw and saw truth written in the rigid set of his shoulders. You lied to me. I told you I was fighting corruption. I told you Drummond needed to be stopped. You did not tell me you were a federal marshal, because I needed your help and you would not have given it if you knew. McGraw turned to face her fully. His rifle lowered toward the ground but remained ready. The gold is marked Alma. Every coin has been traced. This shipment is evidence in a federal case that will put Drummond and his entire network in prison. Evidence that cannot help my brother if it disappears into government vaults. Evidence that will clear your brother when it proves the money he was accused of stealing never left Drummond's control. Clayton stepped closer to McGraw but kept his weapon ready. Something in his posture suggested their partnership was more complicated than simple law enforcement. Problem is, Silas, someone tipped off Drummond about tonight's operation. He is riding this way with 8 men and instructions to kill everyone he finds. McGraw went very still. Alma felt ice form in her stomach despite the warm evening air. How long do we have? Maybe 20 minutes. Maybe less. Morrison and the guards had backed toward the station building during the conversation. Now they stood pressed against the log walls watching the standoff with wide eyes. We need to move the gold. We need to get out of here alive. Clayton and McGraw spoke simultaneously. Neither man lowered his rifle. The tension between them crackled with unresolved history. Alma looked at the partially transferred gold bags. At McGraw, whose secrets had secrets. At Clayton, whose loyalty seemed divided between duty and survival. At Morrison, whose nervous energy had transformed into pure terror. 8 armed men riding toward the clearing. 20 minutes to escape or die. Her brother's life hanging in the balance of decisions made by people she was no longer sure she could trust. The sound of distant hoofbeats echoed off the canyon walls. They are coming fast. McGraw's voice carried new urgency. He moved toward his horse while motioning for Alma to do the same. Leave the gold. We can build another case. No. Alma's voice cut through the clearing sharp as winter wind. Both marshals turned toward her with surprise. That gold represents the only chance my brother has. If it disappears into evidence rooms and legal proceedings, Ezra dies while lawyers argue jurisdiction. She raised her rifle and pointed it directly at Clayton. We finish the transfer, all of us. Then we decide who rides where. Clayton's eyes narrowed. His own weapon swung toward Alma with deadly precision. You are threatening a federal officer. I am saving my family. The hoofbeats grew louder, closer. McGraw stepped between the 2 rifles and raised both hands. We finish this together or we all die together. Choose now. Clayton lowered his rifle first. The decision came swift as a hawk diving for prey. He moved toward the gold bags with efficient motions born of necessity rather than agreement. We secure the evidence and get clear of Drummond's men. Then we sort out jurisdictions and justice. McGraw joined the transfer without another word. Alma kept her weapon ready while watching the forest for approaching riders. The hoofbeats had grown close enough to count individual horses. 8 riders moving fast through mountain terrain meant they would arrive within minutes. Morrison and the guards helped load the remaining bags onto pack animals. Their movements were clumsy with fear, but the work got done. The gold disappeared into canvas saddlebags that looked ordinary enough to avoid attracting attention. Where do we go? Alma asked the question while checking her horse's tack. The animal still favored its injured leg but would have to endure whatever came next. North Canyon leads to an old mining camp. Abandoned, but the buildings are solid. McGraw swung into his saddle and gathered the lead rope for his pack horse. Clayton mounted with equal efficiency while scanning the tree line for movement. Drummond knows those trails as well as we do. Then we make our stand where we choose the ground instead of letting him choose it for us. The first riders appeared at the southern edge of the clearing as the last pack animal was secured. Alma counted 5 men with rifles across their saddles. More would be following through the forest. Move. McGraw's command cut through the evening air sharp as breaking glass. The small group of riders spurred their horses toward the northern canyon, while gunfire erupted behind them. Morrison and his guards scattered toward whatever cover they could find. The trail north climbed steep through pine forest that blocked the fading sunlight. Alma rode hard despite her horse's limp. Behind them, Drummond's men shouted orders and crashed through underbrush in pursuit. Clayton took point while McGraw guarded the rear. Alma found herself in the middle with the pack animals carrying $50,000 in marked gold. The irony was not lost on her that she was now protecting the same money she had planned to steal. The mining camp appeared suddenly around a bend in the trail. 3 buildings constructed of local stone with timber roofs, solid enough to stop rifle bullets, positioned to command the approach from below. Main building. McGraw pointed toward the largest structure as they thundered into the clearing. It had been a stamp mill once. Thick walls with narrow windows perfect for defensive positions. They dismounted and moved the horses into the old equipment shed where they would have some protection from stray bullets. The gold went with them. $50,000 in stolen money that had become evidence in a federal case that might never reach trial. Alma positioned herself at a window facing the trail. McGraw took the opposite side while Clayton climbed to the loft for a better view of the surrounding forest. The building smelled of old machinery and abandoned dreams. How many men does Drummond have? 8 riders plus whatever help he can gather from local ranchers. Clayton's voice drifted down from above. He had found a position near a gap in the roof timbers that gave him clear shots at multiple approach routes. We cannot fight 12 men indefinitely. We do not have to fight them indefinitely. We just have to survive until federal reinforcements arrive. McGraw checked his rifle and counted ammunition. His movements were calm and methodical despite the approaching danger. How long until reinforcements? Could be hours, could be days. Alma felt her stomach drop. Hours they might manage. Days would mean death or surrender. The first shots came from the forest edge as Drummond's men tested their positions. Bullets sparked off stone walls and whined away into the gathering darkness. Return fire from the mill building was precise and economical. They are probing for weak spots, Clayton called down from the loft. His rifle cracked twice in quick succession. Someone in the forest cursed loudly enough to be heard across the clearing. The siege settled into a pattern of sporadic gunfire and long stretches of tense silence. Drummond's men had numbers, but the mill building offered superior defensive positions. Neither side could gain decisive advantage without taking casualties nobody wanted to accept. As full darkness fell, Alma found herself watching McGraw more than the forest. The man moved through the building with familiarity that suggested previous experience with such situations. His calm competence was reassuring even as questions about his true nature continued to multiply. "Why did you really help me?" The question came out during one of the quiet periods. McGraw looked across the darkened room with eyes that reflected starlight through the broken roof. "Because your brother deserved better than what he got. Because you deserved better than what desperation was making you become." That is not a complete answer. Because I have a sister, had a sister. She died trying to expose corruption in a mining company. Died alone because I was too busy with my own career to help when she needed it. The admission hung between them heavy as gunpowder smoke. Outside, the forest was silent except for wind through pine branches and the occasional creak of settling timber. "I am sorry." "Do not be sorry. Be alive when this ends. Be free when the courts sort out justice and injustice." Clayton's rifle fired 3 quick shots toward the eastern approach. Answering fire came from multiple positions as Drummond's men coordinated their next assault. "They are moving closer." The words carried new urgency. Alma checked her weapon and counted remaining ammunition. Enough for a sustained fight, but not enough for a long siege. Dawn came gray and cold, with mist rising from the valley floor. Drummond's men had maintained pressure throughout the night, but gained no ground. The mill building showed fresh bullet scars but remained secure. The sound of approaching horses came from the south, multiple riders moving fast up the mountain trail. Alma tensed for renewed assault, but McGraw smiled for the first time since the siege began. Federal marshals. Clayton's signal fire worked. 20 men in blue uniforms rode into the clearing with weapons ready. Sheriff Drummond and his remaining followers surrendered without further fighting. The corrupt network that had destroyed so many lives was finally broken. 3 weeks later, Alma stood outside the territorial prison watching Ezra walk free. The marked gold had provided evidence that cleared him completely while exposing the full scope of Drummond's operations. Justice had taken longer than hoped, but arrived when it mattered most. McGraw waited beside his wagon at the prison gates. He had cleaned up well for official duty, but still looked more comfortable in range clothes than uniform. "Where will you go now?" "Back to teaching. Ezra and I have an offer from a school district in California." "Good. Teachers build the future. Marshals just clean up the past." Alma approached his wagon one final time. Her hands were steady now and her heart was light with relief. But something remained unfinished between them. "I believe I owe you something." McGraw smiled with genuine warmth. The expression transformed his weathered features and reminded her why she had learned to trust him despite all the secrets. "Just my heart, miss." "Well then, I reckon I will need to give you mine in return." She reached up and took his hands. The calloused fingers that had held weapons and worked horses were gentle as they closed around hers. 6 months later, they were married in the church Ezra had helped build in their new California town. McGraw had taken early retirement from federal service to become the local sheriff. Alma taught school during the week and helped with his cases on weekends. They worked together, helping families rebuild after encounters with corruption. The network they had helped destroy was gone, but new problems always arose that required people willing to stand against injustice. On quiet evenings, they rode the hills above town and talked about hearts that had been forgotten and found, about second chances and the courage required to trust when trust had been broken, about love that grew from shared purpose and mutual respect. The gold had been returned to its rightful owners. Ezra taught mathematics and civics to children who would grow up believing in justice. Sheriff Drummond spent his remaining years in territorial prison, regretting the corruption that had seemed so profitable. And sometimes when the sunset painted the western sky red as fresh beginnings, Alma would remember the moment she had pointed a rifle at a stranger's wagon and forgotten to take his heart. Some things were too valuable to steal. Some things could only be given freely. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.